She stood on my driveway with a stack of papers in her hand, waving them like she owned the whole street. "You can't live here! This is HOA property and I'm suing you!" She shouted so loud that neighbors peeked through their curtains. I didn't even move. I just looked at her and said, "Karen, this isn't your HOA. This isn't even your land." But she smirked, like she knew something I didn't. Then she shoved the papers into my chest. "You'll be out in 3 days, I promise you that." The worst part? She had actually filed something in court. She told everyone on the block I was a squatter, that I forged my deed, that my home didn't legally belong to me. I could hear whispers every time I stepped outside. One neighbor even asked me if I was moving. My wife's hands were shaking when she showed me the online post Karen made in the community group. "This man is living here illegally. HOA doesn't allow outsiders. We will remove him by force if needed." For a moment, even I wondered how far she'd go. She taped fake HOA violation notices to my door, bright red ones that read, "Eviction pending." My little girl asked me if we were going to lose the house. I told her no, but deep inside I knew Karen was stirring something bigger. She had pulled strings before. She once convinced the city inspector to fine another neighbor for a non-permitted swing set. Still, I wasn't scared. I had been through worse battles than this. And unlike her, I didn't need to scream to prove power. Because Karen had no idea. The property she was trying to steal had a history. And the paperwork she thought I faked? I had the original deed signed by someone very important. Someone even Karen couldn't challenge. I kept calm, but in my head I was already setting the trap. And I whispered to myself, 3 days? Karen, that's all I need to end your little empire. Day 2 came, and Karen was already parading around like she had won. She stood outside with 2 men in cheap uniforms pointing at my house. "That's him! Get ready, he's going to resist." The so-called officers stepped onto my lawn, one of them holding a clipboard that looked like it came out of a copy shop. My wife pulled the curtain aside, her face pale. "Are those even real cops?" she whispered. I stepped out calmly, and Karen grinned like a villain in a movie. "Sir, you need to vacate immediately," one of the men said, his badge barely hanging on his shirt. I looked straight at him and asked, "Which department are you from?" He hesitated, glanced at Karen, then muttered, "Community enforcement." I almost laughed. "Community enforcement? That's not even a thing." Karen quickly jumped in. "They're with HOA security, and they have the right to remove trespassers." I let a long silence hang in the air. Neighbors had gathered now, phones out, recording. That's when I pulled out my own phone and spoke loud. Enough for everyone to hear. Good thing. "I know the law better than you, Karen, because I wrote it." Her smile twitched. "What are you talking about?" she snapped. I walked down the steps, calm as ever, and looked those fake officers in the eye. "You're impersonating law enforcement. That's a felony. And you—" I turned to Karen. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." She froze, her confidence shaking for the first time. "You can't scare me," she hissed. But what she didn't know was that my past wasn't ordinary. I wasn't just a homeowner. I had served as a federal judge before I retired, and my signature was on more rulings than Karen could ever count. And tucked safely inside my briefcase in the house was the original court-certified document proving my land was never under HOA authority. I leaned closer so only she could hear me and whispered, "Tomorrow I'll see you in court. And you won't walk out smiling." The courthouse was buzzing the next morning, and Karen walked in like she was the queen of the world. She wore a bright red blazer, heels clicking against the marble floor, waving at neighbors she had dragged along as witnesses. She spotted me sitting quietly with my wife and smirked. "Hope you packed up your boxes. You won't need that house after today." Her voice carried so everyone could hear, and a few people actually nodded like they believed her. When the clerk called the case, Karen marched up first, slamming a folder onto the desk. "Your Honor, this man forged his deed. His property is inside HOA territory, and he refuses to follow our rules. We demand his eviction." She sounded so confident, as if the judge would just sign papers without a second glance. She even pulled out her fake HOA bylaws printed on office paper, waving them around like scripture. The judge raised an eyebrow and turned to me. "Sir, your response?" I stood up slowly, carrying a thick leather folder that had been with me for years. My wife squeezed my hand as I walked forward. I placed the documents neatly on the bench. "Your Honor, not only is this land not under any HOA jurisdiction, but I have the original court ruling from 20 years ago, signed and sealed, excluding my property from annexation. And that seal, I tapped the gold stamp on the paper, is mine. Karen laughed, rolling her eyes. Nice forgery attempt, she scoffed. But her smile melted when the judge leaned closer, studying the document. His tone shifted. Mrs. Parker, do you realize who signed this ruling? Karen blinked, confused. It's a fake, obviously, she snapped. The judge shook his head slowly. No, it's not. This was signed by a federal judge at the time, and if I'm not mistaken, he turned his eyes toward me. That signature is yours. The courtroom went dead silent. Karen's face drained of color. My wife held back a smile, and I finally spoke, my voice steady. Yes, Your Honor. I presided over that case myself before retirement. Karen tried to sue a federal ruling without even knowing who she was suing. Gasps filled the room. Karen stumbled, her papers slipping from her hands. She looked around for backup, but her so-called witnesses were quietly backing toward the exit. And then the judge's gavel struck. Case dismissed. This court recognizes the defendant's rightful ownership. And Mrs. Parker, you may be facing charges of fraud and harassment. Karen's lips trembled as she whispered, No, this can't be happening. Karen's downfall didn't end in the courtroom. It only started there. By the time I got home, the whole neighborhood had already seen the live stream clip spreading online. Someone had posted the exact moment the judge revealed my identity, and the comments were brutal. Karen messed with the wrong guy. She tried to evict a federal judge? Unreal. The next morning, Karen was outside again, but this time it wasn't to scream at me. It was because real deputies, not her fake ones, were walking up her driveway. They carried a warrant, and neighbors lined the street, phones recording as she shouted, "This is harassment! I run this community." One officer read her the charges. Harassment, filing a false lawsuit, impersonation through fake officers. Her face went pale as they cuffed her. My daughter peeked from the window, eyes wide. "Daddy, are they taking Karen away?" I knelt beside her, pulling her close. "Yes, sweetheart. She won't bother us anymore." For the first time in weeks, my wife let out a long breath, tears forming in her eyes. "It's over," she whispered. But for Karen, it was far from over. Her little empire of fake HOA rules collapsed overnight. The city revoked her community association license after discovering she had forged paperwork for years. The very neighbors who once whispered behind my back were now at my door, apologizing, embarrassed they ever believed her. I stood on my porch looking out at the same street Karen once ruled with fear, and said one line that made its way back into the online. Clips, I didn't fight for this country, just to be told I can't live on my own land. And that was it, justice, loud and clear. My family safe, my home protected, and Karen finally exposed for what she really was. A fraud who thought she could play judge, but ended up facing one instead.